morning and welcome back to the lecture series on partition of India in print media and cinema. So, we are talking about a refugee woman and patriarchal society. We are here, we are going to make a comparative analysis of Ghatak and Ray's films. We have already talked about The Cloud Capped Star or Meghe Dhaka Tara and Satyajit Ray's The Great City or Mahanagar. So, one could say that Ray's films approach, of making the film approach to the watershed called partition is from a point of view or it is from a point of extraordinary confidence that he exhibits on, or the extraordinary confidence that he shows, and which is I mean it draws on his general faith in humanity. So, an extraordinary confidence on humanitarian grounds, on something that draws on his faith in humanity, in the possibilities, the good possibilities in a human character. So, he believes that a civilization, a people cannot be entirely defeated and broken by a cataclysm, by a watershed such as the partition. They can still rebound. The refugee, the immigrants have the qualities, have the potential to rebound, to question the wrong and be resilient thereby. So, the strength of Ray's films lies in underlining what the post-partition Bengali refugees or immigrants have and what they are capable of. Ghatak narrates partition through a very powerful usage of myth, art and music. However, he converges on the aim of advocating rights only for a specific group of the immigrant populace to which he also belongs. So, there is a I, you or we, they rhetoric to which Ghatak relapses again and again, or to which Ghatak chooses to go back again and again. The question of immigrant and native populace, the East Bengali, West Bengali populace and the difference is something that comes back again and again. Ghatak is advocating for the rights of the immigrant people very clearly and very and this keeps coming back frequently in all his films. So, Ghatak had this love-hate relation with Calcutta where he saw the city as responsible for the East Bengalis migration and plight, their joblessness and Bengal's partition in general. However, Ray sees the city as a fellow sufferer, the city that is suffering along with the Bengali populace, both the natives and the immigrants. It is very interesting how in Ghatak's films such as in Subarnarekha and Bari Theke Paliye focus on the protagonists leaving Calcutta and going back to their home, the idyllic home. The desire to return, the nostalgic desire to go back to the idyllic origin keeps coming back in Ghatak's films and keep informing his different films, albeit with changed perceptions. So, although the characters have a significantly different perception, they are still making a way back to home. On the other hand, in Ray, we see Calcutta as a source or as a a hub of endless possibilities. So, in Parash Pathar, we see Ray's opening sequence shows a man's minuscule figure from above. So, it is a top view of the city and the man is trying to cross a busy street in a big city, and this individual eventually acquires some prominence before the camera. From a diminished figure, he becomes a full-bodied human. It implies an endless, the endlessness of absurd possibilities within Calcutta. Anything could happen within a metropolitan city, a city not only takes away from an individual, but makes an individual, but rather renders individuality to a person, it enables self discovery, different aspects. One is able to discover different aspects of oneself through the vast opportunities that are available in a metropolitan city such as Calcutta. So, it does not only take away, but also gives back, is something that Ray wants to depict in his films. Priyanka Shah questions the possible typecasting in Ghatak's films. So, Shah notes that East Pakistan has been portrayed in Ghatak's films as an idyllic place breeding prelapsarian innocence and purity. On the other hand, Calcutta has been time and again portrayed as a dumping ground of debris. Calcutta to Ghatak is a place which he loved to hate and hated to love. If East Pakistan is portrayed in the shadow of the Emily Bronte's Yorkshire moors, vibrant and innocent, then Calcutta resembles Dickens' London, a dark world of apocalyptic stupor. So, Mahanagar provides a personalized platform for the story to unfold, where the female protagonist bears the socio-economic adversities of partition, and yet one cannot entirely define her in terms of her refugee identity. She is not only a refugee woman, she is more or less than that, but not just that. The film is an antithesis to the nationalized accounts that have been consciously appropriating or misrepresenting women. So, the heroine has a different story to offer about herself, about her professional sphere, which carries the lasting impressions of partition, and yet it succeeds to overcome the accounts of nostalgia, suffering, or it is not only an overdone or underdone tale of a woman's success caused as a result of partition. It is a very specific story, specific to Arati, an ordinary middle class woman. She is not a symbol of or does not bear a larger meaning. She is neither demonized nor deified in the film. So, Mahanagar does not follow Ghatak's predictable line, where the Bengali refugee woman is shown as the demi-goddess and epitomized as a miniatured Bengali nationhood. So, we see that the figure of Bongo Bala, torn and the torn Bengali motherland keeps coming back in Ghatak's work, in most of his works, and it replicates the Indian nationalist rhetoric in narrating Bengali nationalism. So, it is a miniatured Indian nationalist rhetoric focused on the region of Bengal, and woman's figure, just like we celebrate Mother India, here Ghatak is celebrating Bongo Bala with the same fervor, like I said, through the figuration of the ill-fated, the star-crossed woman. On the other hand, in Mahanagar, we see that in the length of the journey traversed by Arati from her home to the world, there is a distanciation from the immediate post-partition syndromes. She acquires components of optimism and individualism, and so she does not necessarily enact the role of a gendered mythical model who is portrayed in tragic messianic shades through the lens of the patriarchal history. She is not the patriarch's imagination, she is a real woman and thereby more nuanced. And so, compared to Nita, whose bhadra or correct conduct keeps the last strings of prestige attached to her impoverished family, Aarti is experimenting with her role as a saleswoman. There is a point when she makes up stories in front of her boss. She lies also. So, she talks about, she cooks up a story about her husband's, there is a point where she lies, she makes up stories and does not tell about the real situation of her, real situation back in her home. and this is actually caught by Subrata. He is surprised that Arati is capable, so she has this aspect in her, she is capable of lying so smartly. So, so we see that Arati is constantly dealing with a new persona or different personas, different facets of her own self. So, both Arati and Anita's working status summon some degree of inversion of gender space and gender roles, and there are significant moments in both the films which subscribe to this. For example, Nita returning after a day's work and Sanat serving him a glass of water. And in Mahanagar we see Arati's mother-in-law serving her lunch and later even cleaning away her dish, and so she almost occupies, she assumes the role of the patriarch in the household as the only earning member. However, and we also see that Arati and Nita both dispense their salary for their respective kin's needs. However, Nita's act of giving is programmed. She is pressurized and she cannot do otherwise. She is forced by her circumstances and hardly allows the audience to inquire her will, what she would like to do. Whereas Arati can spend at least a part of her first income towards buying gifts for her relatives, which gives her a relatively greater room of independence in terms of choice. So, neither Arati's profession nor her household is able to wrench out duties from her, and she does not compromise herself. She is in charge of her priorities. On the other hand, Nita is the utopia of the male idealist, the way the male would like to see a woman, devoting her wages for her family's prosperity, and even her obligatory job looms on her in the form of depression, disease, and finally it takes away her life. So, Arati is caring and dutiful to each member of her family, but not an icon of sacrifice, and so she is a survivor in the end. She is not goddess like, but she is instead timidly picking up from her job experience, and she is learning from the public space, and after a point her family does not remain her only reason for going out and becoming an earning woman. She has a vibrant circle of female colleagues in the office where they discuss makeup, fashion, sex, and so they have a lot of fun in the office. The office as a space is not oppressing them. In fact, the office in the salesperson's job, it is a female majority. Other than the boss, most of the members, in fact all the members in the team are females. So, they discuss everything, and she actually enjoys her office space. She emerges as a team leader. And her there is a point where Subrata is perplexed when she talks about commission. He never knew that she has a knowledge about commission, money earned besides the basic salary through negotiating with the boss, and that is when she mentions the boss by his first name, calling him as Himanshu Babu rather than Mr. Mukherjee. So, a subjective side of a demanding worker is coming up in this picture, in this scene, a very powerful one, where in the process of manufacturing want in others, which a salesperson is supposed to do. A salesperson manufactures desires, needs in others, and in the process of doing this job, Arati has learned to desire, she has learned to negotiate and demand for herself. So, she talks about commission and bargains. So, this newly acquired desire is shown in a scene once again very powerful, where Arati is sniffing her money, the money in her first pay envelope, and Nita on the other hand works both at home and in the office. She is unable to get the most out of her earning status, and so she cannot establish her importance either within or outside. So, in a way one could see Satyajit Ray as having moved ahead of or away from the Ghatak school's impression that immigrant based coalitions can always be smoothly accomplished, or that the immigrants are a homogeneous body. That is a very problematic assumption, like we have been discussing in all our previous lectures. The refugee as a people are highly homogeneous and assorted, people who cannot be understood outside of their caste, class, socio-economic, cultural, realities. So, there are all these grids that separate and segregate the experiences of the refugees. There is no one umbrella refugee experience, and this is something I mean that is established, that is reinforced by Satyajit Ray. He questions the very assumption that refuginess is homogeneous. He disagrees that a pre-partition geographical closeness between two people could disregard their otherwise present day class based differences within the metropolitan structure of Calcutta. We realize there are points in the film where Himanshu Mukherjee, the boss, is a little uncomfortable taking he's uncomfortable inviting Aarti inside his car, giving her a lift, and he soon after Aarti steps into his car, he talks about his wife being a maniac and a cleanliness freak. So, he is thereby referring to the probable unsanitized conditions in which middle class refugee families might live. So, it goes on to show that he is maintaining a distance with Aarti. He talks about the fact that his wife cares a lot for sanitizing everything, and this is something he says once she steps into the car. So, the difference is maintained, and yet there is a point when he is trying to manipulate Aarti by saying that we are both from Pabna. So, I am going to give you some more advantage if we could throw out Edith from the job. So, he is constantly shifting his positions in the throughout the narrative. As more commercially tenable factors such as profit, greed, success get pulled into relationships, Aarti's urban middle classness and her position as a female immigrant cannot really connect with her East Bengali boss, just because both of them trace back their roots to the same place. Does not necessarily mean that they can connect in every way. Rather, she can connect more with her female Eurasian colleague, Edith. So, her friendship with Edith is possible through overlooking the linguistic communal differences, and instead looking at the gender and economic socio-economic sameness. So, they more or less belong to the same class. There is a glimpse inside, there is a there is a point where the camera covers the inside of Edith's home, which is very similar to Aarti's. Edith belongs to the lower middle class family, and so neither Aarti nor Edith can actually identify with the position, with the rank and with the status that Mr. Mukherjee has in the society. Rather, the two women can relate to each other more. So, it is not enough to see Aarti only with respect to her sex appeal or even her modesty. She is neither very appealing nor modest. She is constantly playing with her physical appearance. She is putting it to test against her different male relationships, from her husband at home to her boss in the office, and she is thereby exploring her own identity. Poulami Chakraborty comments that Aarti's company selling the knitting machine, which replaces hand knitting, her gifting her son a toy gun rather than telling him fairy tales. Then there is a point where the family is borrowing a thermometer from the neighbor, and there are intermittent flowing in of evening news from the radio, all of which imply a touch of technology which conceals the past. So, Aarti's image, all these the aids of technology are important in shaping the new woman that Aarti is, and however, as Chakravarti would argue, it happens, the shaping of Aarti as a new woman, as the modern woman in Calcutta, is possible through covering up her partition experiences, wherein her entity as a refugee woman exists. However, it is a little difficult and even problematic to claim such prelapsarian past, because the Bengali refugee populace, the middle class refugee populace, did not entirely and absolutely belong to the geographical space of East Bengal, as has been argued by many critics and established by now. They would travel back and forth. They had many relatives and friends in Calcutta, in the parts that went on to become Western Bengal and part of India, and so it is a little futile and even problematic to ask to seek for such pure identities. Even Chakravarti at a point says that the family does not use the East Bengali dialect. To which one could respond that for the same reason, for the fact that they had a strong connection with Calcutta in professional terms, in terms of in terms of the colleagues that they had, the relations they had, the assertion of a pure East Bengali dialect is not very important. What is important is rather looking at the motleyed presence, the motleyed meanings in a Calcutta where all kinds of population live. And in fact, Ray is showing that while a section like the Aarti's family are marginalized, there are also East Bengalis represented by the boss, a very powerful figure, a person that is very successful, who can give jobs to others, who can take away jobs from people, from women like Edith, who clearly belong to the fringes of the city. So, once again, refugee does not mean only one thing. So, next I am going to talk about a story by Narendranath Mitra. It is called Jaiva, Jaiva or biological. So, it was first published in Choturango in the winter of 1948 and republished in a collection Golpomala. Narendra Mitra's story revolves around a young middle class couple, Mriganko and Shudatta. The structure of the household is modern, nuclear, and it is marked by the absence of either of the couple's parents and relatives. And Mriganko is a professor of chemistry whose wife had been abducted in Lahore and later recovered by the time she had become pregnant. So, Mriganko initially accepts her back within the folds of domesticity, and the reader does not come across any mess within within the order of or within the mundane order of life. So, later Shudatta gives birth to this child who's I mean a child conceived through the abductor, and so arrangements are made to put the child in an orphanage. However, there is an impulsive moment. The Shudatta constantly wanted to get rid of the child, to terminate the child, but once the child is born, there is a moment where her motherhood overrules everything else, and Mriganko decides to take the child home. However, subsequently Mriganko develops an obsessive interest in biology. He shifts from chemistry to biology, and he starts reading extensively on heredity and effect of genes. So, Shudatta faces the greatest crisis when he discovers that her husband is looking at the child as a lab specimen, as an object of experimentation, and making notes in his diary, and she becomes desperate to abort her second child. She now conceives with her husband. So, she is afraid that he would like to he would be interested in a comparative study like one does with other animals inside a library. It would render a subhuman status and position to both her children, and this is also an alternate way of us realizing his masculinity, or experimenting with his masculinity. In a way, Mriganko can be argued as comparing and competing with the unknown abductor to see whose child is better genetically, and it severely oppresses all these experimentations and clinical treatment of children and comparisons happen at the expense of severely oppressing the woman that has mothered both the children. So, there is a point where Sudatta says, Dr. Babu, you know I have conceived again, but this time it has not yet reached such an advanced stage. I am sure you can help me at least this time. She indicates aborting the second child that was conceived with Mriganko. So, this proclamation portrays the condition of Sudatta and Mriganko's marriage, which outwardly looks very normal. So, in the context of partition violence, the abduction of Sudatta and the aftermath of it have serious consequences. In the story, Mriganka's stand to accept Sudatta as well as her baby is later on, one realizes, the story reveals that he has not accepted Sudatta's child as a human child as such, but he wants to use it for his own scientific experiments, and that is so his ambitions in his professional life actually determines and decides his his familial being, the person he is in the family. So, he also wants to have a second child for the same purpose, in order to serve his experiments, where two children get to be compared. What is the position of the narrator, the Dr. Babu? He is also a doctor and a friend of Mriganko. He steers clear of the entire situation, and that is his Bhadra position. He is also duplicitous, hypocritical case, who is not helping the helpless woman. He is playing the silent onlooker, who in a way abets the crime happening, the cruelty being enforced on the woman, on Sudatta. Next, we are going to talk about Angapali, or Embrace, by Ramapada Chaudhary. So Angapali presents the return of Sabita, who was formerly abducted, and she comes back home with a child born of abduction. So, Chaudhary exploits the possibilities of third person omniscient narration, so that he can show not only the mixed reactions of Savita's relatives in her natal home, but also persists reflect on the persisting doubts and ambivalent attitude of Sabita, the main character. So, Sabita is caught between the affection that should prevail in the private sphere and the adverse impact of her past in the public sphere. So, she is aware that so many changes had occurred within this short span of one year and a half, making it impossible to come full circle after undergoing a deeply traumatic experience. So, Savita was overwhelmed by melancholy for her father, her brother and her sister during abduction. So, this is very interesting how a woman does not feel sorry for herself as much as she does for her family when she is at a point when she is abducted. She naturalizes and normalizes the fact that her body belongs more to the community. It is more of a shared possession than it is her own body, her own identity. She feels that others suffer more, they are humiliated more than she is. So, the ponderings of Sabita arouse multiple feelings until she is exposed to the guilt that springs from failing to comply with the social dictates. So, she says at a point, maybe they had even forgotten the dark stain of dishonor that had fallen on the otherwise untainted reputation of their family lineage. So, she has forgotten her own plight in a bid to think for her family, how she has caused humiliation to the lineage, family's reputation. So, birth of the illegitimate baby, so called illegitimate baby, makes her feel ambivalent, because that unwanted and unwelcome child, not born out of love and affection, a mere product of hate and animosity, still is her own flesh and blood. It reminds us of Lalita Antarjanam's story, A Leaf in the Storm, and so many other stories where a woman becomes pregnant and she does not know how to deal with such unwanted pregnancy. Even we can compare this with the case of Sudatta, who wanted to terminate her first child, but after experiencing motherhood, she wants to keep the child. This also takes us back to the statistics in history, the facts in history, the rehabilitation policies, where many young mothers, many rape victims that had become mothers for the first time, reported shattering experiences when they were made to part with their children. They were taken back to their country of origin, whereas the child deemed as a child of the male rapist or abductor was given to the family of the abductor. So, if the woman had to go back to India, the child was given back to the father, who was now a Pakistani, and it was a shattering experience, especially for the first time mothers who were very young. So, the insistence of Sabita's mother to wash her, cleanse her throughout, and even cleanse herself throughout the story loses its anecdotal nature, and the ulterior motives come to light. It is not merely her customary beliefs, traditional beliefs why she keeps washing herself once Savita returns. One realizes that she is so obsessed with cleanliness owing to the presence of the child in home. So, religious and social beliefs, although generally unspecified, prevail for a woman who displays clear generational differences with descendants who do not share such deep rooted ideas of cleanliness. So, we see the mother seeking purification through her actions, which takes back Sabita to her traumatic past indefinitely. So, the worst punishment comes from the words that construct her as an outcast in her own home. So, we see that we realize that the mother is not performing the ritual of cleanliness due to some customary habit, but because of the presence of the child who is half Muslim. So, the restoration of abducted women can only be effective on a geographical level and not on an emotional level. We have seen this in the case of Lajwanti and Pinjar too, that the reconciliation is never organic. There is a crack that cannot be or a gap that cannot be bridged. And so things never become like before. The combination of politics, faith and traumas is irreversible, and they hinder any possible demonstration of affection, whether bodily or verbal. So, Chaudhary's short stories have encapsulated some of the most conspicuous characteristics of what abduction and its subsequent trauma could mean for women. And Sabita's past is not as painful as her present. Her past is secondary to the variables that come into play after she returns to her natal home. So, from this story we realize that there are so many different experiences, so many different predicaments that women had to deal with, repatriated and brought back to their family of origin. So, with this I am going to stop today, and we will meet again for our next lecture. Thank you.